And, in this day and age, I have to draw this parallel. There are so many helicopter parents, more so than your free range, go play outside kind of thing, because we know all the dangers that are lurking. But it is important for our kids to know what it means to be bored, be independent, go out and problem solve, use your imagination. How can we simulate this while knowing that we want to keep them safe?
People become victims of the system. And this system has kind of become this overwhelmingly difficult situation where you try to over-doctor and engineer someone's future. I think the best thing for these parents would be to find out that they actually have very little control. Of course, you have a very important role to play, to be the guardrails and try to point things in the right direction at all times. You're not their creator and you're not the shaper of their personality in the way most people think they can be. And most of it is done with good intentions, but they get into it so much that they take away from the creativity and the play that makes a child a child. I see it everywhere, and it's a pity that that's the system we've created.
There is no hood like parenthood. Hi, I'm Kanika Gupta. I'm a former CNN journalist, mom of 3, including twins, and host of That's Total Mom Sense, the podcast. Now, if I had $1 every time I heard, gee, you have your hands full. On my show, I interview change makers on their life lessons, legacy, and superpower of intuition, which I call our Mom Sense and Dad Sense. I've had the privilege of working with Mom 2.0, March of Dimes, and the White House, and have had some pretty amazing parents on my show.
Hey, what's up? I'm Kelly Rowland.
Hi, this is Chelsea Clinton.
It's me, Bobby Brown. Can't wait to share my story.
That's Total Mom Sense is a production of the Evergreen Podcast Network. Be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts and on YouTube so you never miss an episode. To join my tribe, visit that'stotalmomsense.com and follow me on Instagram at Kanika Chadda Gupta. Now let's dive into today's episode.
In the US, moms have a buying power of over $2.4 trillion annually. They're a key demographic with substantial purchasing power and influence over household spending. I know this for my party of 5. I am honored to have global thought leader Pranav Yadav join me today. He's going to tell us how advertisers can effectively appeal to our demo, and more broadly, what happens when we process these messages in our minds, bodies, and subconscious that drive us to act and complete that point of sale. Pranav is the founder and CEO of Neuro-Insight US, a pioneer in the field of neuromarketing, an active investor, and an advisory board member to several organizations, and has prior work experience working at Red Associates and Goldman Sachs. He is a Forbes 30 Under 30, an Under 30 All-Star alum, Ad Age 40 Under 40, an AMA 4 Under 40, Ad People of the Year awardee, Ad Week's Young Influential, a Great Mind Award winner, and has a passion for philosophy and Urdu and Punjabi poetry. We're also going to glean from his life lessons that he's learned and documented along the way. Pranav, I am honored to have you on That's Total Mom Sense today.
The pleasure is all mine. Thank you for having me. I did my research, watched a few episodes. I'm neither a mom or a parent. So I'm grateful to be invited to your podcast. And on a more serious note, I think you've done a fantastic job humanizing and giving context to some topics that everybody struggles with through the lens of both experts and our heroes, and it's a remarkable thing to have done. And that's your contribution to life and society through your, expert, journalistic and empathetic lens. So congratulations.
Thank you, Pranav. I really appreciate that. And I feel you and I can relate to the fact that we're following our dharma. That's all it is. I want to give a shout out to our friend, Priyanka Kriplani, who's sitting in Bombay right now. We realized that we both, knew her. You went to Carleton College with her, also coming from India, and she's a dear family friend. So PK, if you're listening, hello. And we met at the Fempowerment Foundation Awards and panel where you spoke. And I was just so taken aback by your eloquence and wisdom, and that's what really compelled me to reach out. So I'm glad that we've gotten a chance to get to know each other, and you get to share your life story with my listeners. Let's start with those early days in Faridabad.
Sure. Born in Faridabad, India was still socialist. Most people worked for the government, because that's kind of what happens in socialist countries. My parents were doctors, worked for the government. It was in 1991 that India liberalized the economy. So till about then, I'd say that we had one brand of cola, one brand of car, one TV channel. So people who grew up during that era kind of recognize and can identify with it. I mean, I associate them with some of the happiest times in my life. Yet, your exposure to what is out there and what is possible is defined by what you're consuming. I was about 15 years old when I read an ad in the newspaper that said the Singaporean government is going to pick 30 kids from India and give them a full ride to go to boarding school in Singapore. Brought it home and told my parents and announced it at the lunch table. I got lucky, and that's how I ended up in Singapore for boarding school.
It was very commonplace for families in India to send their kids to boarding school. My dad went to Bishop Cotton along with his brothers. That's in Shimla. And I had many cousins who studied in Uti. It was always like the hill stations. But it's not as done in the US. And I want you to, really share, was it net positive?
It was the hardest time of my life, I would say. I struggled in a variety of ways. Yet I think it fundamentally changed my life. I was talking to one of my oldest friends, who I was friends with at that time as well. And he remembered me writing an email once I got to Singapore. And I had described these doors that open automatically because I hadn't witnessed too many like that in my life. So you can imagine, for a 15-year-old, I didn't know anybody who had studied abroad. Not in even not just not in my family, but I hadn't met a person who had studied abroad.
Right.
I'd never sat on an international flight. Definitely had not spoken to a Chinese person before or a Singaporean person before. And here I was going to be in a hostel with 97 other boys, most of whom came from places that were different from mine. So very difficult period. I was also on a scholarship, which was fairly strict in its ways, that if you didn't perform academically, then they would terminate your scholarship. So you were always under the pressure as to you don't know if you're good enough. And to me, experience is nothing but knowing that you've been in a bad situation that felt difficult before and that you have come out of it. And all experience tells you is to actually not lose sight of where you are and know that this too shall pass, and that as long as I'm doing the right things and I have my back against the wall, I will move forward eventually. And I think it was the first time I was learning that in my life without the support of my parents or the general support system that I have, that I can feel like this and yet I can come out victorious. And once you actually go through that experience a few times, the next time you feel you're out of ideas, you may still, not have the idea, but you'd remember that you've done this before. So I think that was the first time in my life where I got that life lesson.
And, in this day and age, I have to draw this parallel. There are so many helicopter parents, more so than your free range, go play outside kind of thing, because we know all the dangers that are lurking. But it is important for our kids to know what it means to be bored, be independent, go out and problem solve, use your imagination. How can we simulate this while knowing that we want to keep them safe?
People become victims of the system. And this system has kind of become this overwhelmingly difficult situation where you try to over-doctor and engineer someone's future. I think the best thing for these parents would be to find out that they actually have very little control. Of course, you have a very important role to play, to be the guardrails and try to point things in the right direction at all times. You're not their creator and you're not the shaper of their personality in the way most people think they can be. And most of it is done with good intentions. but they get into it so much that they take away from the creativity and the play that makes a child a child. I see it everywhere, and it's a pity that that's the system we've created.
And now I want to fast forward to, when you began your career, you were the youngest CEO of Neuro-Insight at age 25, that ripe old age. And you met with, now chairman of Neuro-Insight Australia, Richard Silverstein. What did he see in you?
So I started my career at Goldman Sachs, and it was everything that I ever wanted at that point, right? Like, this was the first time in my life I had financial security, I had the pedigree, I was living in New York City. Goldman Sachs was the best firm in the world at that time to work at. Like, that was just that, right? And within a few months of being there, I knew that I didn't like it. Like, I have everything that the society celebrates, and I'm told it's a good thing, but I'm not feeling good. So I kind of quit Goldman at the peak of recession a few days after my promotion, to then literally find myself in a spot where I didn't know what I was doing. I eventually then ended up working for an innovation strategy consulting firm, where my first project was to go to India and figure out why, despite it being 120 degrees in the summer, Indians don't buy air conditioners. My second project was to go to Copenhagen and look at data from about 150 cities across 250 variables for the past 50 years and figure out why cities have failed in the past. And then my next project was to go to Vegas and figure out why people game and gamble. What can we learn about the future of gaming from that? But at the core of all of that work was social scientific research. I was sitting and meeting people and sitting down with them for 6 to 8 hours. And what I realized, what people said in the first hour was different from the second hour, completely contradictory to the fourth hour. Made me wonder, what is it that actually makes us make decisions? Because these people, clearly, I'm semi-friendly. These people are not trying to lie to me, and yet they are contradicting themselves. So what is it happening up in their brains that's making that happen? And I got really interested in the idea of the subconscious, which by definition sits below your conscious awareness, and how it impacts decision making. And I started reading the papers that neuroscientists were writing about it, and I found that Richard, who originally invented a brain mapping technology in ADHD research, was looking into the impact of that measurement in decision making overall. And that really got me interested. So a common friend of ours put us in touch, and we sat down for a good few hours. And at the end of the meeting, he's like, would you like to, do this with me? And so what made him say that? Like, he, as gracious as the man is, he will say now that, I knew in the very beginning. But I think it was primarily that, one, I was passionate about the topic. Two, I didn't come from any experience in the field, neither in neuroscience nor in advertising or marketing. And he'd suffered at the hands of people who came with pre-existing notions from these industries as to how things should be. So the fact that I didn't come with any experience was almost a positive. As he mentions, as one of the foremost experts of ADHD in the world, he believes that some of the most creative people in the world come with the ADHD condition. And apparently he saw that as we spoke, even though it took me a year to actually go to him and tell him, like, hey, by the way, I just want you to know I have ADHD. And he laughs and he says, I've known this. So
Wow.
So that was my interaction and how I got to be CEO.
That is incredible. There's no denying that we are the sum of our five. And, surely Richard is still a mentor to you and in your five. Who else do you turn to?
My friend, philosopher and guide, John Zweig, is someone I really admire. I actually reached out to him when I was leaving Goldman Sachs when I was 24 years old. He was then, amongst the most important people at WPP. And he gave me, at the time of day, I got along philosophically. And before meeting him, I hadn't met a man who I wanted to be like. I didn't know what it meant to actually have a hero like that. This man was everything I could have imagined. He was a philosopher. He had fought the Vietnam War. He was a jazz musician. He was at the helm of this remarkably creative media and marketing conglomerate. And yet he was in business while keeping alive within him the zest for life and philosophy and humanity in the way that he did. And then my other inspiration comes from my favorite poet, Javed Akhtar, who I've had the fortune of spending time with as well, which was a dream come true, but someone who's through his writing and through his ideas has inspired me. And even though we've had that distance for the longest time of not being together, I read his stuff and I listen to his stuff, and I feel that it guides me regardless.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, his words are so evocative, and to see them in film, I've had Zoya on the show, and it's just, I feel like to kind of be the patriarch of a family where his kids kind of all shined in their own creative outlets is incredible. And you can see why that happened.
Yeah, I mean, it's a remarkable mindset. First, he's like, I think, a fifth or the seventh generation poet, but also one of the biggest supporters of women's rights. And not today, he has been for all of his life. To have a remarkable partner in Shabana Azmi and celebrate her for all that she does for women and the impoverished people in the country. Of course, in the movies, you'll see him write songs because the characters demand a certain kind of expression. You are bound to that character. But when you read his poetry outside of film, you realize what a deeply thoughtful man he is. And he writes about time, and it's like metaphysics. And he writes about, the game of life like being a game of chess. Ye khel kya hai? There's a recent poem that I read. The title of the poem is Bheed, like it's a crowd. And he explains the conundrum of the crowd. And he says, as I stand in this crowd, I see millions of people and millions of people behind those millions of people. And this place is so crammed that I don't even see the slightest place for a small ant to walk around it. And as I stand here, all I want to do is find myself a corner and subside in that corner. But if I do that, I know that the millions of people who are coming from behind me will walk all over me. So now that I walk, I can feel someone's arm, someone's shoulder, someone's chest under my feet. It's like, oh, my dear heart, you take a lot of pride in being a fair person and a morally upright person. So I want to ask you today, what have you decided? And it essentially explains the conundrum of our societies, right? Like,
Yes.
We know certain systems we propagate in terms of, our obsession with the material, our obsession with wealth, our obsession with constantly moving forward and having more, etc. These are not great systems. We know that to be true, but we're so scared of stopping because we know that someone else will come and overtake us. And so now that we actually function within the system, we are taking away from other people who we could have helped and actually walking all over people. And while we feel like we don't have a choice, we always do. So, if you think you're that morally upright, what is your decision? So I think it's a remarkable poem around conundrum. And I think there is no answer in it, but the question itself is a wise one.
Yes. Oh, 100%. There is such a duality, a yin and yang to life. And I know when we met in person, we were talking about the Bhagavad Gita, and it reminds me of the burning question that Arjun had was, which virtue do I turn to? Is it loyalty or truth? Yeah, I think we live in a world where it is very much Kali Yuga. And I guess bringing it to advertising, sex sells, temptation is undeniable. Do you feel that advertisers have moral responsibility to do what's right for social good for the public?
They do. I mean, there's no two ways about having the moral responsibility.
Yeah.
Whether they recognize or act on it is a whole different ballgame. And I don't think they do. Even though it directly impacts my business, I am very happy to say it on record that most people do not care And most people do not give it the time of day that they need to do. But the smart ones actually do, because it's good for business. You shouldn't do it because it's good for business. You should do because it's the thing to do. But if you've done that thing, it actually is good for business. And let me tell you why. Our brains are built on memories. If you don't have memories, you don't really have anything to act on. Culture is built on memories. Your identity is built on memory. Your problem solving skills are built on memory, etc., etc. And if you do not have the capacity for that, you really won't be anything. Culture is built on the fabric of myths, mythology. You just raised Krishna with me. I'm right there with you because I've heard the same myth. I mean, the fact that you and I may not call it myth or believe for it to be myth is a different story. But we've heard the same stories. And that essentially creates a fabric of our identity, existence, who we can relate to, etc., etc. This business of advertising is nothing but a business of memory creation. And the human brain is a pattern-seeking and storytelling device. The way it actually creates memories is through the means of stories. So when you actually talk about Krishna talking to Arjun in that opportune moment of the Bhagavad Gita, you realize that actually it is a very small part of this mega epic, the greatest, longest poem written in the history of mankind, the Mahabharata, which starts off actually 3 or 4 generations before Arjun's generation.
Yes.
There's a king, and he falls in love with a fisherwoman, and wants to marry the fisherwoman, but the fisherwoman's father doesn't want her to marry him. And then his son, who is Gangaputra, takes the pledge that I shall never take this throne, and the fisherwoman's son will be king. And that story lends itself to these 3 sons that were born at some point. The oldest one was blind, the second one was weak, and therefore when it came to taking over the throne, the weak one took the throne, and the blind one, despite being the oldest, did not get the throne. And then he had 100 children, and the other one had 5, and now the weak one died, and the question is, who's going to take the throne? So it's a saga, intergenerational, huge saga, and you are engaged. You want to find out what's next. And then when the story comes to this culmination of like, all right, this saga is going to come to a resolution, and the greatest warrior in the world is going to set foot in war, and we're going to find out whether he can finish it or not, because he has 7 armies, the other guy has 11 armies. And at that moment, this guy gets cold feet. And he turns to the incarnation of God, who is his charioteer, and says, bro, I'm a little confused. Let's chat, right? So in this mega story, even though, the Gita is a small part, someone had to actually, tell the story for you to be engaged, to actually now find out the magic of the Gita. And that is advertising. You need to actually find the core human truths in society and tell a story about that. And if your brand, your key message or marketing can be a part of that story, you've created magic. So the magic in advertising is not finding a place to insert your brand. It is about finding the human truth or the story that actually creates engagement. Going back to the beginning of the podcast, when you spoke about mothers holding so much of the buying power, it is true. And advertisers want that market, but they have to find the truths of the mothers, their day-to-day experience, not this overly glorified, immaculately well put together woman who's sitting in her house and smiling at her baby, wearing Huggies or Pampers, walking towards her. My first project in life was, I won't mention the company, a big European conglomerate. And they had a baby food brand that they were about to advertise. At the end of the ad, they had a jingle, a 3-second jingle, in which you had 1.5 seconds of an instrument and 1.5 seconds of a baby laugh. And that combination came in 6 different combinations. There was a young baby laugh with a piano, an older baby laugh with a piano, young baby xylophone, old baby xylophone, piano, piano, xylophone, xylophone. 6 combinations.
Okay.
And they want to figure out what deeply resonates with mothers, which tonality, so that they actually create fondness for the brand.
Yeah.
So we did the study with hundreds of mothers, stuck electrodes on their heads, looked at the subconscious brain activity, and I had to present to like a big board with an answer. And I was like, as we discussed, I was 25 years old. So I walk in there and I said, I have good news and I have bad news. The good news is that we found an answer. The bad news is we have guesses as to why this is the right answer, but we don't really have a real answer, right? Because the brain is telling me that it's feeling something and that it's creating memory for this sound. Why it's creating memory needs a lot more work. And at this point, when I tell them what the combination that worked, this older gentleman takes his glasses off, throws it onto the table, and he goes, "Can't believe it." And I was like, "What happened? What do you know that we don't know?" And he says, "Well, this was the exact sound we played for a candy brand in this market when these mothers were young girls." And so it was a memory and an association they had carried through their teenage years into being young adults. And now that they were having babies, it was the same thing that was calling them and made them feel comfortable. Whether it be mothers or not, that's the only thing that's actually going to give legs to a brand. Otherwise, you're only going to make money till you spend the money on advertising and performance marketing.
Wow. This reminds me of, what we learned in English lit class. It was Aristotle's rhetoric. So you've got ethos, which is credibility, logos for logical reasoning, and pathos is your emotional appeal. So would you say that, if an ad is primarily relying on pathos, that's what drives the memory because you're now emotionally invested in what you just saw?
It could, but memory creation is its own beast, right? There's a Hungarian scientist by the name of Szent-Györgyi, and he says the human brain is not an object of thinking. It is an object of survival, like fang and claw, and so constructed to use to its advantage anything that can be useful for its survival. Emotion is one way into memory creation. So the pathos is a great way, but there are other ways. The shortest way to memory creation is relevance. If something is personally relevant to me, I create memories for it. That's number one. Emotion is the second best way to create memories. But the reason why, as you mentioned, sex sells, etc., is things like visual delight can actually also lead to memory creation because of its uniqueness. But if you only use those tools, there's enough imagery like that. So you're not doing much. So you have to create a story that has relevance and emotional intensity, hopefully in a combination of both. And those are the master craftsmen of storytelling, but at least with one of those two.
Yes. Could you tell us a bit more about how this patented technology works? Because I'm just so fascinated by it. The fact that you can pull data and, understand what actually landed is just remarkable.
Yeah. I mean, if you come to think of it, it is fairly simple. The brain, as it develops, learns how to specialize. It specializes in its geolocation of what part of the brain is going to reflect what kind of activity. So if you're showcasing some personal investment into a topic of discussion, the prefrontal cortex will light up. If you're showcasing memory creation, the lateral prefrontal cortex is doing most of the heavy lifting. So as long as we have tools that are sharp enough, which we invented, we stick electrodes on people's heads and look at the electrical activity that we can catch on the surface. And the reason why we can catch it is because, as you know, the tool that the brain uses to communicate with each other are these neurons that fire. And some of that electrical activity, that resonant electrical activity, is found on the scalp. When there's more activity in one area, you can actually see more activity in that part of the scalp. So we don't have to put anything inside. As long as you have something touching the scalp, like you may have seen an EEG or an ECG machine, it's kind of using the same kind of technology to be able to get surface level electrical response. So now that we have this thing on and we have a large enough sample size, because each one will come with their own predisposition, right? When you walk into a room, you're thinking about your 3 kids, you're thinking about the twins, you're thinking about the podcast. You have a lot of stuff going on. And your reaction to what you're seeing is not just your reaction to that thing, it is your reaction to that thing mixed in with everything that's happening in your life.
Yes.
When I come in, I'm in my own little zone. Someone else comes in. So we need a large enough sample size that can essentially take out the noise and can leave behind the true response to that thing. So as long as I get a large enough sample size and a large enough, accurate enough machine to do that, I can begin to figure out that when you're listening to a story or looking at a product or an idea or a concept or a strategy, I can figure out on a second by second basis which pieces of it are emotionally engaging, which pieces of it are personally relevant, which pieces of it are causing a lean in response, which of it are actually causing a withdrawal response. And more important than anything else, which pieces of it the brain chose, are the most important and iconic things to put into memories. And at this point, if I have to summarize, my work and what we do, we're the largest repository of memories in the world. Like we're the largest measurers of memories in the world, and we have the largest repository of memories in the world.
Wow. I just want to do a quick rapid fire as we wrap up. What is a moment in time that you recall where you trusted your intuition?
I have no other way. My motto in life, which I learned from my friend John Zweig that I mentioned earlier, is to be open, fearless, and spontaneous to the rich unfolding of life. So if I'm not listening to my intuition, I'm actually not being myself, and I don't recall a time when I don't do that.
Ah, brilliant. And I love that. What is a book that you can read over and over?
Javed Akhtar's Tarkash.
I have to read these. I really need to get into his poetry. I feel like I have not even scratched the surface. What is a mantra that you live by?
Live and let live.
Would you regale us with some shairi? Because I know you.
I'll give you one, and I'll translate it for your audience as well. If there are Indian people watching, they'd remember the movie Kabhi Kabhi. And within that, they'll remember that song, which essentially is Kabhi Kabhi Mere Dil Mein Khayal Aata Hai, that sometimes I wonder. And that song is about, the positive side of love. And there's then the actual poetry that was written around it, which is around separation and what happens post that. So I'll read you that little poem to see if hopefully your audience can engage and appreciate. कभी कभी मेरे दिल में ख्याल आता है कि जिंदगी तेरी जुल्फों की नरम छांवों में गुजरने पाती तो शादाब हो भी सकती थी. Sometimes I wonder that if my life were to be spent under your beautiful black tresses, it may have been a successful one. ये रंजो गम की स्याही जो दिल में छाई है, तेरी नजर की शुआओं में खो भी सकती थी. That this black ink of darkness that flows through my heart could have actually been the mascara to your eyes.
Yeah.
मगर ये हो ना सका, but it could not happen. मगर ये हो ना सका और अब ये आलम है कि तू नहीं, तेरा गम, तेरी जुस्तजू भी नहीं. That but it could not happen, and such is the situation that neither do I have you, nor your pain, nor the desire to be with you. गुजर रही है कुछ इस तरह जिंदगी जैसे इसे किसी के सहारे की आरज़ू भी नहीं. That I'm spending my life in such a way that I don't even need someone's shoulder to cry on. ना कोई राह, ना मंजिल, ना रोशनी का सुराग. भटक रही है अंधेरों में जिंदगी जैसे, इन्हीं अंधेरों में कहीं खोकर मैं रह जाऊंगा. मैं जानता हूं मेरी हमनफस, मगर यूं ही कभी कभी मेरे दिल में ख्याल आता है. So neither the path, nor the destination, nor the slightest hope for light. In this darkness, I will spend my life. And I will spend my life lost in this darkness. I know, my love, but sometimes I wonder, which is how the poem started.
Ah, Wajiva. Oh my goodness. It's like, yeah. Pranav ki ho gayi vabaiva. That was really, really incredible. And how can our listeners and viewers follow you? I know you Do you post and share your life of pi, PY?
Well, on LinkedIn and Instagram are the greatest sources. I do have a request for your listeners. We find ourselves in a place in life and society where there's a lot happening and our lives feel busy and rushed, and there are too many things for us to do. And yet, if we have to go back to the purpose of our creation, which, people lean on religion to answer that question, but, they don't really find that many answers. We all find out that it is our investment into the human project. The previous generations invested in creating civilization, life, society, farming, fire, wheel, the internet, for us to live the lives that we do. And we have the responsibility, the right, the power, and the responsibility to create the future that is coming. And it is our generation who kind of shoulders that responsibility. So in our quest of being on the treadmill, sometimes we forget that that's kind of what we're doing. And so as long as we can live a morally upright and correct life and do nice things to other people, I think that's the future we'd like to be creating. So I just wanted to put in the request to your phenomenal audience.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, I shared recently that legacy isn't what we leave behind. It's in the lives that we touch. And I think we all can pay heed to that because we are really building and shaping society from the ground up, not just how we raise our children, but how we conduct ourselves. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with my audience. And this was such a treat, Pranav, truly.
My absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. I hope you got some great takeaways from our conversation. Join my community by logging on to that'stotalmomsense.com. If you haven't already, please subscribe to That's Total Mom Sense, the podcast, wherever you listen, and be sure to rate and review. On socials, my handle is at Kanika Chadda Gupta on Instagram, Threads, TikTok, and X. You can also find me on LinkedIn. My episode videos are on YouTube and YouTube podcasts with highlights on YouTube Shorts. Write to me at that'stotalmomsense@gmail.com. My team and I read all your pitches and feedback and are so glad to be in touch. Remember, always trust your mom sense and dad sense. Stay strong, super parents. See you soon.